Once more, good morning, and thanks to Jan and Christian, Professor Capri and Nürnberger for inviting me to speak in front of you about a technology that I'm enthusiastic about that will offer us many opportunities, and I try to give you an overview about it. 2 days ago, I was invited by the Japanese Orthopedic Association to speak about wearables and orthopedics, and then I found this actually as the first wearable activity monitor ever used, and I chose to put a slide in here for a reason, because it shows that in order to make a wearable work, you need a device that's user-friendly. You need a metric that's understandable and actionable, like steps, and you need a reference value to go for. So this 10,000 steps per day, the Manpo Kai, that was just invented by the company to market this device. They didn't have any evidence, but you know, when you buy your Fitbit today, it's still used. Yeah, it's quite interesting. So, and this actually I find is the most important slide, and maybe the only slide I would need to show today, because there are so many wearables around. You probably may use some or have seen some, and because there are so many, it's difficult to make the right choice for the right purpose. So I chose to organize it as a kind of a map of wearable tech to choose it, and I made different aspects amongst to choose from. So first is, what's the domain you want to measure? I'm personally most interested in motion, and motion is for me movement and physical activity. But you can also use, for instance, geolocation. You can use heart rate. And I put this picture of the Polar Accurex 2 heart rate monitor in it, because that's what I bought in 1991 as a student from my pocket money. It was at that time 500 German marks or 10,000 Luxembourg francs. So it was for a student that was like 2 months rent, but I wanted to have it. Yeah, just out of, I didn't know what to do with it. The heart rate zones, they were not yet established, but I wanted it. So then of course you can have an ECG, an EMG. You can measure respiration, sweat. It's interesting also for anxiety, elevation. If you go skiing or skydiving, there are so many sports. Stretch or deformation can be measured. Sleep is also an aspect in fatigue. So first, what is the domain you want to measure? And then the environment where you want to do it. Is it only in the lab? Then you can have different devices which are not so user-friendly or have a certain battery life. Do you want to use it in the clinic for assessment of patients after, for instance, ACL restoration? Do you want to use it in the field, so on a football pitch or in the gymnasium? Do you want to use it at a home environment or in real life? So anywhere, anytime. So that's why environment and duration fit together. You have to choose how long do you measure, just some seconds in the lab. So do you just want to do a lab test that's augmented by wearables? Or do you want to measure a few minutes? Or do you want to measure a full sports session, so a football game or a marathon run? Or do you want to measure a full day while the subject, the athlete or the patient is awake? Or do you want to measure 24/7, including sleep? And then do you want to do it just for a day? Or don't you want to use it for a week, a month, or permanently? And that defines on what choice you want to make. And then, most important, what are the parameters that you want to develop, to derive, and what do you want to use it for? So do you want a parameter that's related to athletic performance? Do you want something that's related to injury risk? Do you want a diagnostic biomarker for, let's say, early onset of an arthropathy? Do you want to assess the outcome of a treatment? Do you want to monitor exercise or rehabilitation compliance? And then it's the sensor modality that you choose to measure this. So what's actually the sensor, the raw sensor, what's it's measuring? Most commonly used are accelerometers or GPS, inertial measurement units. You have pressure sensor, and there are many more. And then you can decide on what device you're going to use and what are the usability aspects. So do you use a single device, multiple device, fused devices, like in a smartwatch or phone? Many sensors are fused together. Do you want to apply just one sensor or put many on the body? And that defines on the size, weight, battery life, depending on how long you want to measure, where you want to measure. And then what do you do with the data? And how do you want the data to be used? Are you relying on a real-time analysis of the data? So as the device collects the data, do you need the data real-time? Because the athlete wants to monitor something during the competition to make sure they stay within a certain safe zone. Or can it be delayed, maybe a minute or 10 minutes later because the coach is looking at the line? Or can you do it totally post-processed, so a week later because you only need it for research? And then that defines, do you need to do, or can you do the calculations on board? So do you need processing power on the device, or can you put it in the cloud, or can it run later on a server? And then who's the user? Is it the coach or the doctor? Of course, there you can use other metrics, other analysis methods when you use it with an athlete or a patient. And I think that this is a template to choose your device. So when we are talking today about assessing athletes or patients, which is about outcome and mobility biomarkers, I want to focus on movement mainly today. And there are two things how we are doing it. Often it's in self-report, and this is from a self-experienced anecdote when patients come for a questionnaire-based assessment, even about pain. They ask their partner how the pain was, and then in the consultation there's a discussion between husband and wife how much actually there was the pain. So this is not very robust and reliable. And then we have the laboratory. I like laboratory assessment, but of course it has also its limitations as represented here. So when you look at the different methods of assessing athletes or patients, you can use the questionnaires and ask an experience or a recall, thinking and finding out how someone thinks what they can or do. You can go into the lab, do a performance test, or you can go into the real world and actually see what the subjects really do instead of what they can do under maximum performance, under instruction, under idealized environment. And I want to focus on these two things today. So again, in summary, I like to go out from the lab and the hospital in the field or in the real world and go away from momentary and episodic assessment to long-term and frequent assessment up to continuous one, and go away from the can-do, so the function and quality, more to the does-do, so the behavioral part of assessment. And this is another concept I like to present to visualize this. So when you look at the top, it's a 24-hour day, and then you can do, for instance, activity and sleep monitoring 24/7. And I think that sleep is probably in athletic performance and fatigue something that has not yet been sufficiently explored. But you can do also, let's say, activity monitoring only during the waking hours, which gives you much more opportunity with regards to usability, because if you don't need to sleep with the device, you can use a bigger device, you can use a shorter battery life. Or you just monitor the exercise and sports event. So, but of course, because that may only happen every second day for half an hour, you are missing a lot of activity behavior. And then there's something that's becoming popular. It's called a guided routine. So you have a wearable, and with an app you trigger a test procedure in the free living environment, and the subject performs this test, and by having the time stamp, you know how to analyze this particular test. So when it comes to physical activity in sports and in orthopedics, I think it's very important, because the limitations in activity are often the reason for an intervention. If a person cannot jump anymore or cannot perform a specific activity, they are seeking medical advice. And the return to physical activity is a safe return to work or play. So we would like to find out, can the subject and does the subject do a certain activity again in real life? Of course, physical activity is also a healing stimulus for bone healing, osseointegration, soft tissue healing. But at the same time, it can also be a risk factor to develop conditions like osteoarthritis or osteoporosis. And when you use an implant, and that can be also a tissue graft for a torn Achilles tendon or so, and you want to test that in the laboratory, we need input to know what are the realistic loads that athletes or patients perform in real life to develop artificial grafts. So if it's so important, why has it not been measured routinely? And one reason is activity has been measured, but mainly in a general health context and in the lifestyle fitness context with very rough measures. So the daily step counts that we have since 65, they have been used, some very rough sleep metrics and something that's related to energy expenditure, which has a general health aspect, but I think for sports specific or disease specific use, they are no good. But luckily we have many more sensor domains nowadays available that open new doors. One are, for instance, very promising are plantar pressure insoles that can be worn for days. Nowadays here are some visible that I have used, the Moticon insole, and there's something from Novell, and in the bottom right corner that's from a Luxembourg company, IEE. They also have a new sensor device that comes from the airbag sensors in the passenger seat, so it switches off the airbag when there's no one sitting, and they have developed now such a device that's very thin, very flexible, so when you put it into an athlete's shoe, they won't realize a change in behavior, which has been a usability issue with all the other solutions that runners or cyclists don't like these pressure insoles because they affect their behavior. And then you can do center of pressure assessment, ground reaction forces. You can do these butterfly plots that are used in this context. Then you can have EMG assessment either with tiny wireless sensor dots or also with textile EMGs. These can only be worn for a number of hours. They are not yet available for 24/7 multi-day assessment, and their usability may be limited to this, but it's possible. Then you have stretch sensors, which can measure, for instance, a joint angle displacement or deformation of the muscles, by which you can, for instance, measure respiration, muscle activity, even blood pressure pulsations can be measured from it. Or there has been a smart sock from the AO Foundation where they measured swelling as a sign of healing or non-healing in fracture patients. But the most commonly used wearable sensor technology are the accelerometers and inertial measurement units that come from drones and automotive industry, games. They measure translational movement, the acceleration, and by integration velocity and position, or the gyrometers that measure angular rate, and by integration also then attitudes, that's the angle. And then they are sometimes fused with magnetometers, barometers that can nowadays resolve up to 10 centimeter differences in height, GPS, and then they can be fused by Kalman filters and combined with a human kinematic model, and then you can really measure movement in 3D. And when you put them into a suit with 17 sensors, you can replicate actually a laboratory environment in the real world, and you can take it on a rowing boat and so forth. But of course, you can see that such a setup is not suitable for 24/7 motion assessment for a week. For this, it's too elaborate, and no one will do this. So usually when you do long-term activity monitoring, in practice, you use a single sensor. Then it gives you less data, but you may only be looking for very specific parameters. And then you choose a location that's suitable for your particular assessment. Of course, when you want to assess running, something close to the lower extremity is usually more useful. I saw in the program someone will be talking about swimming assessment. Then of course you may want to have a sensor somewhere on the upper extremity. But one thing that should be always considered, whatever devices are promising, I should always check the algorithm and the proven validity behind it. I think there's a lot over-promised in this technology still. These are devices that I've been using, and the red ones, I am still using them, and you can see they are basically accelerometers or IMUs, sometimes fused with magnetometers and pressure sensors, temperature sensors, for these devices are highly usable, so they can be worn for days or during the night. But we also have nowadays a sensor powerhouse in our pocket that fuses many sensors together and can connect to other wearables to combine assessments. And I think here we could, by developing clever apps, develop sport-specific applications of ourselves. And this is the guided routine. As an example, you wear a wearable, you get a trigger as a subject, please perform a counter movement jump. Then the patient or the athlete can do this jump, and with a timestamp later or via the Wi-Fi connection, a specific signal analysis routine can run to measure the jump height and monitor this over days or weeks. And now if the Wi-Fi connection would work, I could show you a nice demonstration, but unfortunately we could not manage to set it up, but I can show you when you come later to me in the break. I show you now something and I'm glad that I included this slide because it shows a little bit what I wanted to present. So this is an approach that we have developed to do long-term activity monitoring. You see a typical acceleration, 3D acceleration signal, and because the accelerometer does not only measure movement but also the acceleration from gravity, so it can serve as an inclinometer, so the orientation is present, so you can, when you put it on the upper leg, you can measure hip flexion, and you can already see with the human eye, without applying sophisticated algorithms, that you can probably detect movements from it, and by some filtering and some principles, thresholds, decision trees, machine learning methods, you can classify activities and measure them over the day. And that has been a quite robust and valid methods. And I can show you an application that we did, because I think that shows nicely the power of real-world activity monitoring. This is a study comparing patients 2 years after receiving either total joint or unicompartmental joint replacement. You can see that the unicompartmental joint replacement is less invasive, so it should actually lead to superior function in real life. But when you assess it by a patient self-report with a functional questionnaire like the course, or the so-called forgotten joint score, which is now the most valid or sensitive self-report that's out there, or when you use the squash, which is a self-reported activity questionnaire, there was no difference found. And when you use a metric like step count, even on our activity monitor, we could not find a difference, because walking is a very low threshold to very simple activity. But if you look at walking speed as represented by cadence, or if you look at how many steps on a stair were taken downstairs, which is a quite demanding activity for patients with knee conditions, you can see that there was a huge difference between them. So the UKA patients, they walked 8 steps per minute faster, and the minimal clinically important difference for this metric is 4 to 5. So it's quite a big difference, and there were more than 2 times as many steps taken on the stairs down. So this was less frequently avoided. But there are also applications in sport. Of course, that's what we're here for. And you may know the discussion about this new running shoes that have a very high insole, use a carbon plate inside, by which all the long distance records, 5K, 10K, semi and full marathons records have been broken recently. And it was called the Nike Vaporfly 4%, because Nike said, okay, it's 4% faster than another shoe. So that's what Nike claimed from the laboratory study. And I show you 2 studies that try to prove this. So one was performed in the laboratory, 18 elite runners with a sub 31 minute for the 10K, They run on a treadmill 2 times for 5 minutes at 3 quite, I think, high speeds, at least for me. And then they did expired gas analysis to measure the energetic cost. And indeed, they found, comparing the Vaporfly to 2 other standard shoes, that on average, and at the 3 speeds, the energetic cost was 4.16% lower. So that's nice. So it was a very elaborate, laboratory-based, costly test. On the other side, wearable data was used in a big data approach. You, as sporters, as athletes, you may know the Strava app, which is like this kind of a social web for runners and cyclists. And the authors just harvested, together with Strava, 500,000 half and marathon runs from 700 races. And then via some clever statistics, they analyzed the difference in running times that was achieved for the different athletes, correcting for gender, for race day, for age, people who changed shoes, people who not changed shoes. And you can see, incredibly, that also here it was shown that with these shoes, new shoes, people are on average 4% more, faster. I think this is a nice example how wearable in the real world can produce very valuable data without having to go into the lab. And here you can see I've added also the tabular information. If you look at if it's for men and women, for fast runners, slow runners, enthusiasts. So I think this is for me a beautiful example how wearables, and even bring your own device. So instead of buying a device, but actually using the device that people have with them anyway, and using big data, what you can achieve with this. Then of course, wearable devices are also used in football, and you can see on the left a popular device you probably have seen or being worn is a GPS sensor on the upper back. The advantage is that this is FIFA match approved, so that can be used, this vest. And but the only difference, or the main difference between this and a GPS watch is that it samples at a higher rate, so that you get a higher resolution, and then you can produce these heat maps. But on the other hand, you can also use an accelerometer and a gyrometer without GPS, put it on the shoe, and that also gives you all the position metrics that are listed there. So you can see all these, like distance covered, work rate, number of sprints. That also is easily derived by it. But of course, because you have the accelerometer and gyro on the shoe, you can measure many more football relevant aspects, like when you hit the ball, so number of touches, kick velocity, time on the ball, time to release. So you can see that with another technology, you can measure new aspects that are probably relevant for improving the game or measuring fatigue or over or under training. But I also want to refer you to a new upcoming technology in football and team sports, which I find quite fascinating, that uses AI-driven monocular, so single camera 3D motion capture. This is the computer vision term for this is pose estimation, and there are many programs out that can do that, open source, by Google, Facebook, Amazon. They all have these kind of things that comes from the automotive industry, again, for the autonomous driving, because also there they have to identify people who are walking across the street or not walking across the street. And then you can do real-time multiplayer assessment. This is open source, so anybody can just use this and use pre-trained models, and then you can with a single camera follow a whole game, and that is already used. So you can also produce the player positions and generate heat maps from it. You can monitor live the ball position. You can do player-ball interactions, player-player interactions. but you also have the individual body segments in the joint, so you can even analyze how people are doing this. I think there is a big future in this, and this is just upcoming. But of course, how do we use it in injury prevention? How can that be used? One study that has been performed by my colleague, Laurent Malissou, is that they have used self-reports, online self-reports, and also running from their own device to identify patterns in training and the development of injuries. I thought he may be here today and could refer to the results himself, but maybe he can be present this someday. Another study that we are planning to do is to use the activity monitor in patients after ACL reconstruction to avoid re-injury and identify the safe return to play based on the real-life behavior. So the walking and running in real life, uphill, downhill, stairs, and so forth, and see if we can identify a digital biomarker for safe return to play. One thing, and I'm very glad that Christoph Ley is present, is also here, because that's where we collaborate and where we gain support, is to analyze these wearable signals also using machine learning techniques. One project that we are working on with a Canadian partner is that we use the signal from the shoe to identify the running surface, because whether you run on asphalt, whether you run on grass, on sand, on uneven surfaces, that can also detect or can contribute to the load spectrum and therefore to the fatigue. And we have also two consortia. One is called S-Training and one is called Sports Health, where we also are using wearable signal traces and biomarkers to correlate them with injury risk or injury development in running, but also in any sport where we want to combine with a sport-specific wearable. We want to also combine general activity behavior and sleep and exercise, because we believe that this also contributes to the injury risk. And I think it could be a discussion also in this group, what would be candidate parameters in the context of injury prevention. So what aspect of sport, exercise, or general behavior would be an indicator for developing an injury? Of course, this cannot be done on my own and on our own, so I want to recognize our collaborators and also the international algorithm user group that uses our algorithm. And to close, I want to say, so let's get out of the lab into the real world, because that's where things are happening. So let's go out and harvest the evidence. Thanks.